One thing the war on Ukraine has shown us is that sanctions are not just imposed by major countries. Major companies are showing that they will lay some down of their own. Apple announced earlier this month that they were stopping the sale of their products in Russia, as well as limiting Apple Pay. They're also disabling certain live Apple Map functions in Ukraine to protect the citizens there. Netflix shuttered their operations in Russia, which also includes Russian TV news channels. China-based TikTok has put a pause on their live streaming functions and new videos because of concerns over Russian laws that threaten to arrest anyone spreading what they deem as fake news. Airbnb has suspended their operations in Russia while also offering free housing to cover over 100,000, Ukrainian refugees. And more than 60,000 people have booked Airbnb stays in Ukraine just to help out the homeowners financially. Shell Oil and ExxonMobil are also giving up their interest in Russian oil and gas companies, a huge deal since both companies have big investments in Russian oil fields and pipelines. Washington-based Boeing and European-based Airbus, they're on the same page, both refusing to deliver spare parts and provide maintenance, which gives me mixed feelings and leads us to the question, are sanctions actually working to persuade Putin? Here to talk about the issue and the very latest on the war in Ukraine is policy specialist John Koenig. John, you spent more than 3 decades in the U.S. Foreign Service. You know what the situation is happening. Welcome back to New Day.
Good morning, Amity. It's good to be here.
So as we were talking about these sanctions, do you expect these oil sanctions and this pressure from American companies to make a dent, or is it really just the Russian people who are going to be hurting?
Amity, I think the first set of sanctions that you listed, the ones by companies, also many of the government sanctions, especially in the financial sphere, will have an impact over time. And of course, they've caught Putin's attention and probably surprised him because they're so extensive. There are other sanctions that are more symbolic, I think, than real, and will have more of a symbolic effect. For example, yesterday, the ban on imports of Russian energy to the United States is more symbolic, I think, than meaningful. Russia will probably find it easier to find new alternative markets for its petroleum than the United States finds it to find new sources for oil. So it will have a definite impact, maybe more impact on American consumers than it has on Russia.
That's an interesting thing, and we don't even want to get into green energy right now and that whole debate. But I do want to know, Western leaders, they are trying to push in any way they can. They're trying to push back, but they are saying no to certain things. The U.S. and NATO not approving a no-fly zone over Ukraine. First of all, can you explain what a no-fly zone is and why it would be such a dangerous situation for us to get involved in?
Yeah, a no-fly zone would simply be to ban Russian aircraft essentially from operating over Ukraine. And that's already happened. The countries are at war. So in effect, a ban is in place. What's important is enforcement. Zelenskyy and the Ukrainians want NATO to provide the enforcement for the no-fly zone. And enforcement involves clashes between NATO and Russia, which would be violating the no-fly zone. So it would definitely massively increase the risk of a widening war.
And speaking of which, how is it looking with escalation? Is this something that we're going to see widening in Western Europe?
I don't think so. I think we're walking a very fine line in an effort not to escalate. You saw that overnight, the United States essentially turned down Poland's offer of MiGs to transfer to Ukraine. That's because this would be an escalatory step. It's not that we're not transferring a lot of weapons to Ukraine. It's that these kinds of weapons, things like advanced fighter aircraft, have a long logistics train so that we would be involved in those planes being on the ground there, and that would make us a direct party to the war. So I think this is a line we can walk. It'll take patience and discipline, and we need to stand firm.
It is hard to be patient when you see this humanitarian crisis unfold, this humanitarian crisis that likes of many young people have never even seen. Let's talk about that. What is being done across the world, but more importantly, here in the United States to help these people?
I think a lot of people are donating money, which is probably the most important thing to do. In addition to expressing sympathy and solidarity with the Ukrainians, I think actually providing the means to various service providers to help with the humanitarian crisis is important. About 2 million refugees have already flowed out of Ukraine, and that'll undoubtedly grow, that number. And they need to be received, housed when they first arrive, then moved on. And this costs a lot of money. So the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and other private organizations are doing all they can, and Americans can contribute, and I think many of them already have. So you have all these schemes with various companies that are helping people to funnel money to Ukraine and to Ukrainians and to help this effort.
What about a possibility of a peace agreement? Is there any possibility at this point? And what would that look like for Ukraine and Russia?
I think there's always a possibility, so we can never take our eye off of that. It may not be about to happen right away. There have been some encouraging signs, I would say, in this regard. First of all, you have mediation efforts, such as the one undertaken by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett of Israel. That's important. That could actually lead to progress. It hasn't yet, but it certainly could. And you also had a very powerful signal, I think, that President Zelenskyy gave in an interview with David Muir from ABC News, that Ukraine is prepared to negotiate on a lot of Russia's extreme demands. Now, these demands are extreme, and I don't think that they will be the final settlement. Things like ceding parts of Ukraine's territory, relinquishing any claim to Crimea, canceling any effort to join NATO. These are tough, but the fact is we need to encourage these negotiations to go forward, and they are a much better solution than simply fighting this out on the ground in Ukraine.
And holding our breath into that point. John, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we can check in with you again next week or sooner than that. Thank you.